So, welcome everyone. I hope you can hear me loud and clear, so maybe use this as a little sound check. I hope that everybody arrived already. I hope so, let's check. Yeah, because today is a very special workshop. I myself have been looking forward to this for a very long time. Today's workshop is presented by Florenzius and Grymlock and is about advanced Blender techniques with topics like best practices, with do's and don'ts, but also stuff with like level of details and proper light mapping. Before we jump into the workshop, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Questions asked before the event will be answered as long as they fit into the planned content. Those questions could have been asked up until 2 days ago in the channel Workshop Questions. Live questions can be asked as soon as the event starts, so as soon as Grymlock starts with his presentation. Also in the channel Workshop Questions. Those questions will be answered at the end of the show, as long as they fit into the topics, and can be answered in the short amount of time. The whole event will be recorded, so don't worry about having to leave early. Even if you have to leave early, feel free to also leave your questions. You can watch it all back later when it's on YouTube. The plan for today is something between 60 and 90 minutes, depending on the questions and how well everything goes. In the middle of the event, the screen share will switch, since we have 2 presenters today. You might have to manually switch as well. It will be obvious, but just so that you are aware. This was everything for housekeeping, so let's do a short introduction to our host today. The one who will start today is Grymlock. He's a graphics freelancer focused on skinning and scenery, working with Blender for over 3 years, and also known for a ton of collabs and maps in Trackmania. Then we have Florenzius. He's also a graphics freelancer active in the community for many years. I think his biggest project is Trackmania 1, which is a recreation of Trackmania United in Mania Planet. So I think this was it from my side. So let's hand it over to Grymlock and Florenzius. Go ahead, guys.
Yeah, thanks for joining today. I am glad you are all here. And I will start with some frequently asked questions about Blender and especially general geometry design. And I think it was actually Nickel who is here. He asked why sometimes NinjaRipper isn't really working. And I will try to explain the best why it isn't. You may have seen already a few examples in Blender. I can open it up real quick, and also NinjaRipper. Sometimes if NinjaRipper isn't really working, it may be because your track is not quite optimized, like HTMH says. You can convert your roads and trees and whatever you have on your track to model in Blender to items to not have LODs in your final mesh in Blender. And Florenzius is going to explain LODs in the later part of the presentation. And I found out if NinjaRipper imports all things into one place in Blender. So, for example, you have a track here. Let's create a new track. And you want to import it in Blender, and everything is in one place. And you have to manually sort it out in Blender, and it's annoying and it consumes a lot of time. You have to calculate shadows on high. This is because Trackmania's render engine is kind of weird, and it stores block data and item data in a separate way, and it only assigns it to the own block after lightmap generation. So if I create a simple track like this, for example, and then turn these blocks into custom items like this, and then replace them, this removes the LOD. So you have the finest mesh you can have in Blender, and you don't have to look out for special edges like these if they are really bumpy, that your mesh doesn't really fit your road. So create this as well. Just place it somewhere. And then if you aren't familiar with NinjaRipper, you have to open it via the menu I showed before. And then you can also move your track out of the stadium here. And Nadeo recently uploaded some maps or some bases without the sound bug where the stadium is removed. And I highly recommend using these since NinjaRipper doesn't have to rip all the meshes from the stadium and all the billboard signs as well. So it doesn't have to render and extract that much meshes. So then hit F10 and it should freeze TM. This is normal. It has to hook into the render engine and extract all the meshes. And now it unfroze. You can basically close Trackmania and open Blender. And if you have the Trackmania add-on from SkySlide installed, you can just basically turn this to Trackmania 2020 and then auto search the ini file. If it doesn't auto search, or if you don't have Trackmania on your C drive installed, you have to manually search it. And then you can import the NinjaRipper 1.7.1 files. This is the free version. If you have the paid version, this is the button for that one. And I have them here, here, and it is this one. And then import the entire folder. You can read through these, and depending on your mesh and on your track, you can tick these. And I like to remove duplicate meshes since I don't know exactly why, but NinjaRipper likes to duplicate a lot of meshes and it saves some time afterwards for cleaning up. Okay, that is not normal. I try again. I was just testing this like 20 minutes ago and no. Okay, it just some time. If this is happening, you have to increase the view and clip in your view tab. You can put this in and out with the N key. If this happens, you have to increase the N clip by like a 0. And like you can see, oh, this is the wrong file. That's why. That's why it took so long. Yeah, then I explained it on this one. Like you can see, it imported the whole track. Then you can just select the meshes you don't really want and just delete them with X, like this. And if you want to see if NinjaRipper imported all the textures as well, you can go into your render tab here and select workbench. This can also be done in Eevee, like this in material preview, in render preview, sorry. I don't know why it is showing right now like this, but in workbench, you can select matcap and texture, and then go to. I actually don't know why this isn't working right now. So imagine like these are the textures. I think I deleted them like 10 minutes ago or something. But these are the textures. You can use this method to create your background here and then see the textures if they are already applied and if they are ready for export if you want to export the track with your scenery. This was just a quick info, since a lot of people asked me in the DMs why the blocks are in one space and you have to calculate shadows. So for a quick information, florenzius will use this method later in the workshop, but I'll explain it right now if I create a new file. And then, for example, I have this simple cube like this, and I imported it in Blender, in Trackmania, and I want it bigger, but I have to reload Trackmania every time and it doesn't work, and it takes a lot of time. You can simply like rescale your cube and then re-export. And then if you're in Blender, in Trackmania, you can click on the item and then click on this cogwheel and then select the item you want to re-import. And after this menu shows up, it updates the item and it should be resized. So this is like a really quick and easy way to update items without restarting Trackmania every time. Another question I recently got asked in my DMs is how can I create really nice trees in Blender? A lot of people want to create custom scenery, and trees are obviously a really essential part for that. And after tinkering around with some apps, I found TreeIt. The app is called TreeIt, and you can simply download it by going to Chrome or Firefox or whatever browser you have, and then just Google TreeIt. And this is the download site. And after you open up the app, you will see this trunk of a tree, and you can move around with WASD and look around, and also create another sky texture if you want over here in the tools section. Basically, TreeIt is a really nice way to create custom trees for Trackmania, for example, like willows or palms or even ferns. So I'm going to take a sample. It comes with 7 samples, a cactus, a daisy, and a date palm, and I'm going to use the date palm for this one. If I open it, you can see it looks quite nice. And for the example how to use the software and how to import in Trackmania, I used this one as an example. If you want to create your own one, there are a lot of options right here for the trunk. The trunk is basically the main wood type of the model. Then the branches. This one doesn't have branches since it's only a palm and the leaves are coming out on the top. But if you want branches, you can create some like this. And the branchlets are branches that branch out of the branch, basically. It sounds kind of funny, but yeah, it creates some more depth of the model. And the leaf can be changed as well. Like some leaf birches and bushes, and it has some branches as well if you want to optimize your mesh even more. If you're done with your tree and you're happy and it looks quite nice, you can go to File and Export. This FBX export is not good for Blender since it's too old. It's using the ASCII conversion, and Blender doesn't use that one anymore. You have to export it as wavefront OBG. So if you're exporting your tree, just create a new folder. Since it's exporting some textures as well you will need later. You can just name your tree, your folder, something like this, and then save the tree. Oh, no, I fucked up the save here. Create a new folder, and then save it. Okay, why isn't it working? Yeah, I noticed sometimes it crashes. I'm not quite sure why. I can just put it in the workshop one. Now it worked. So if you go and look into your folder wherever you saved it, you can see all the textures you exported and the MTL and the OBG files. Then in Blender, you open it up, delete the cube, and import the OBG of your tree. And it should be, it is quite big actually, so just scale it down a bit. And after that, you can go to Material Preview, and it is looking quite nice, but the tree, the leaves aren't looking how they're supposed to. So go to the tree material. You can usually remove that one and see what changes, and then just undo with Control Z. And down here, below your principled BSDF surface, there is another setting called blend mode. You have to change it to alpha clip. And this allows the texture to be translucent. There's also alpha hashed and alpha blend. Alpha blend doesn't work since it if you can see it here, for example, there are some leaves looking through the other leaves, and this not looking really nice. I just put it on alpha clip. It's sharpening the texture to the part you actually want. Then you can open up the shader editor and import the textures you wanted. So I can import the normals, the roughness, and the transmission. Then I can plug in the roughness. For the roughness, it is a combined texture. I have my search on spacebar, and then you can search for separate RGB and plug the color in. And the red channel is going into the roughness, and the blue channel is going into the metallic. Then for the transmission, you have to use the alpha into the alpha channel. And for the normal, you can plug it directly into the normal, but it won't look quite right. You have to use a bump node. Basically search for bump and then plug the color into the height and the normal into the normal. And then it should give your texture a little bump here. Then you can tweak the strength if it's a bit too much. And the tree is looking quite nice. So if you open up the UV maps, it is already pre-mapped to the texture it uses. This is really important. Basically, you don't have to UV map all the things onto the texture, and it saves a lot of time. If you want to separate the things from, for example, the leaves from the stem, you can select the stem and then press Shift G. Shift G is for select similar faces, and then you can select for area, polygon size, but you want to select material. So now it selects all faces with this exact material. And then press P for separate, and then you have separate the stem from the leaves. You can also do it for the leaves, for example, and then Shift G in material. And you separated, you selected all the leaves and then press P again for selection. You can see that all the things are, wait, why didn't, no. All the UVs are really over the top and overlapping, but this is the base material. This is okay as long as it isn't like completely destroyed. If you want to work with your UVs and want to edit them or want to reshade them, you can press U and reset. This allows for fresh start. So if you took something and moved it to a wrong place, or if you experimented around and don't like your result, you can press U and then reset. For the light map, I tested this previously, and for this tree, you can actually just create a new light map, then select all faces with A, and press unwrap. This unwraps all the UVs onto the UV space. And if you want to if you want to look out for any overlap, you can go to select and then select overlap. And in this example, there's no overlap, and that's really good. Because in Trackmania, you've heard of the shadow bugs on every other map. And if your light map is overlapping, this is causing the shadow bugs. And in this example, there are none. And you have to experiment around. If the unwrap option is causing some overlap, you can also choose the Smart UV project. I'd recommend around 60 to mostly 70 degrees on the angle limit. It depends on your object, and around 0.01 island margin. Then you can see it created these small islands of UVs. And if I go to select and select overlap, there is some overlap on these small islands. It depends on your mesh. And for this example, unwrap is enough. Then I can call it lightmap, and the base material like this. And for your materials, you obviously can't just import the textures. You want to create a texture mod. And this is really nice in TreeIt. If you have multiple textures like a crow or some animals or another plant, you want to create a texture atlas. And you can create this in TreeIt as well. For example, on this tree right here, you can go to tree textures and add image, and then add this one and add this one. And you can rescale them however you like and however you need them. So if you have only these textures, this is basically not necessary since you have enough textures in Blender in Trackmania to model with. But if you have some other textures you want to put into your map, I'd recommend to create a texture atlas. And I prepared some textures right here. For example, this crow, you can put it right there, or import an apple like this for a fruit tree, or another birch sapling like this, and scale it down so it all fits onto one texture. And you can either re-UV them in Blender, and I'd recommend that since you would lose the light map if you would model it in Trackmania, but you can also align the UVs in Trackmania itself if you correspondingly import this texture into Trackmania. So if you're ready, you can look all over these, and alpha mask, this is really important. Otherwise, there are like these really weird black artifacts on some textures. And if you're done, you can just go to File and Save As, and then create a new folder wherever you want. It's saying .atlas. This is just a reference for the app. It also creates a normal map, a roughness map, and a base texture map. So don't worry about this. This is just if you want to reopen it in TreeIt. Then in Blender itself, this tree is basically done right now, except the materials. You want to replace them. For example, this leaf material, it has to be transparent. So in the Blender add-on, I will create a new material with the custom mod trans decal and call it leaves, for example, and then create it. And the great thing with TreeIt is it automatically UV map the base material correctly onto the texture. So the only thing you have to do is replace the date palm leaf in this example with the TM leaves, and that's basically it. Then, depending on how many materials you have in your mesh, you have to replace each of them, or if you have enough, you can create a texture atlas. This also saves a lot of download time for other people if they want to play your map, so they don't have to download like a 10 megabyte mod. Then I also I usually use the item cactus one for basic textures that don't have transparency, since I basically never use any cactuses in my maps, and then call it a stem, for example, and create a new one, and then replace the stem with the item cactus one. And then there's also the custom mod trans and opaque, sorry. And opaque is basically a free sample of a material you can mod and toy around with that is not transparent. So this is really important. You have to mod the leaves onto an existing material that is transparent. And after you linked the correct material, you can call it, for example, bark palm now, and replace the existing bark palm with the new one. And there are a ton of different textures you can use for your modding. And I rarely use any plastic, so I can use the inflatable mat and call it the palm, like this, and then replace this one here. So you can actually see it tries to map the plastic texture onto this one. This is because I have the asset library installed, but it doesn't really matter. It's just showing like this in Blender. If you're opening it in Trackmania, it won't be like this. I also noticed during testing, I took the cactus material and used it for these spots. And it happened that if you use a specific texture, if the UV is mapped outside of the UV square, you get a really weird distortion and you have to remap it into the square for Trackmania to render it correctly. So basically it has everything done, the materials are done, and the light map is done. And I also got asked if how to reduce a model or how to reduce the size of a model. You can use the decimate option. It tries to decimate an object, you can see this, to a really low poly form. This doesn't look good, obviously, but it's just for showcase purposes right now. 10K is quite large for a tree, so I recommend optimizing it a bit. But I just keep it like this for purposes right now. And then if you're finished, I recommend creating a new collection above here with the and rename it to like palm test and put the tree inside the collection and the palm test collection into the main collection. This creates a new folder for your Trackmania items so it won't spam it like all around the place and you have 20 pages of items in game. And after you're done, you can just simply. I also, for the export, recommend I usually tick off the icons and lightmap UV layer. Otherwise, it will overwrite the base material sometimes. And then just export. Yeah. Saving blend file. Like this, and it finished. And I have to restart Trackmania, obviously, since I imported a new item. But this is basically it. And now you can look into Trackmania and see if everything mapped correctly onto the tree. And I recently I've been testing around with reshade. If you want some nice color grading for Trackmania or in general any game that uses DirectX, you can use reshade. It's just a random info to the side if you are annoyed by the blank look of Trackmania. So create a new map. And let's search for the collection right here. I also have this in the previous showcase, but this is the one right now. And it didn't work since we didn't create the ModWork. So for the ModWork, we have to rename all of these into the materials. This is quite tedious, so I'm not going to do it for every texture right now, just for this one. The bark one is named the materials. Bark one is, which one is the bark? This the leaves? Okay, it's this one. So the bark palm, this is correct. And I'm going to rename the bark palm to the corresponding linked material. So look what material you link to this one. It's custom mod opaque. And then I'm going to rename it custom mod opaque. And then underscore D for the main material. If you can have multiple slots for the roughness and for the normal, you just have to replace the D for R and N. And then I'm just going to put this into a new folder since I'm going to use a program to instantly convert this one to a texture mod. Put this in here. And if you're done with your textures, basically do this for every texture you use. It just takes a little while, but it's the same for every texture. You can go into your, I use the TM3 mod exporter. I'm actually not quite sure if it's still in the internet and downloadable. I usually use it for my skins, but it can also be used for mod packs and for where did I save it? It's here. Okay. And then just select the folder you made with your textures. This one here. And in here, there's only this one right now for showcase purposes. But if you're done, you can ignore the output actually. It will auto put the output in here if you select your car skin or map mod for this example. And then it will create a new folder. And the new folder, I usually just name it ModWork. And the maximum resolution I set to 2K since 4K is a little bit overkill for this example. And then the quality to highest. And you just hit export and it exports everything in the folder. This time it's only the custom pack D. But if you have more like the normals or the roughness, it will export everything to DDS. And now I can look into my documents and Trackmania and skins, Stadium, and it created ModWork. Yeah, and it created two. So just move this up, click this one, and it has custom pack D.DDS, and it already has the correct DDS formattation, so you don't have to worry about anything. And then leave the map to reload the ModWork. And then reselect your form. No, I have to reload Trackmania, sorry. And now for the example to re-import, if I just make it smaller or larger and you have to figure out what size you want. If this is too large, you can make it smaller and then just re-import. And in Trackmania, like I showed, you can just click on the cogwheel on the tree and it will automatically update the tree corresponding to your new imported mesh from Blender. So create a new map. And then look for your tree. And as you can see, it is actually using this texture, but as I said, sometimes if the UV is mapped outside of the UV space, you have to remap it in Blender. So if you go to your tree and select these, and then Shift G material, and parent these, then you can open, if you go to any corner like these, a little sign will pop up, this cross, and you can drag over to create a new window just for faster workflow. Then go to UV editing and every side. And as you can see, this is mapped outside of this UV square. And sometimes if you use specific textures, this can happen, that it is really distorted in Trackmania like this. So just go and select everything with A and then rotate it like this. You can hold Control to snap it to a certain degree, and then move it up with G and Y, and hold G again to snap it. And now it is mapped onto the correct UV space. And if you want to close the window, you can also drag it to this. So after you're done, you can just take these two and select both and Control G, join them. This is now one mesh, and then re-import. And Trackmania, I can just use the cogwheel to update the item. And it is using the correct texture now. So I've also looked out for some really handy shortcuts you want to use in Blender, especially if you have a lot of objects in your scene. So if I delete this tree, we don't need this anymore. If I create a cube and then press Shift D to duplicate and put a bunch of them around here like this, and I have a material created here, for example, cube, go and create cube, and it is like set screen, for example, and it's blue. You can create a material and assign it. And if you want to have multiple materials, to have the same material, you just don't have to go to everyone and select it there. This is quite tedious and quite annoying as well. So if you want to save a lot of time, you can just select everything and then click on the cube you want to have the material shared with. So it is the active object in the scene, and then press Control L. This opens the link transfer data menu, and it basically allows you to transfer the data from one object to the other. You can link the object data, for example, if these are spheres, and you press Control L and link object data, everything you selected will turn into the cube. And we want link materials. This is the really important one. So if you click this, you have everything linked to this special material you have on the selected object. And this saves a lot of time if you especially want to model some houses or some walls and have a stone material, and you have to select every single stone or every single wall. You can just select everything and then the main one, and then just link the material. This is quite the time saver if you're using Blender to model stuff. And I really, really recommend to use modifiers. For example, if you have a mirror, or where is it? Array modifier, you can just array the item with any object offset you want, like this. And array, especially array modifier, make workflow a lot faster, since you don't have to duplicate every object, and you don't have to align every object. It auto aligns everything to this one axis like this. If you used any modifier and want to export your mesh into Trackmania, it is really, really important to save your blend file and apply the modifier. Otherwise, Trackmania or the exporter won't apply the modifier to your object. So if I want to export this array of cubes, I have to go here to the little drop-down menu and press apply. Or as you can see, the shortcut for this is just Control A if you hover over the material, over the modifier, and now it is applied. If you're looking for a modifier that doesn't really fit your scenario and it doesn't really create the effects you want, you can use geometry nodes on the tab up here. Just click geometry nodes. You can close this window actually. It doesn't really help for Trackmania related modeling. And you can create a new geometry node like this. It basically is the same as the text as the shading tab right here. You can see these nodes and reorder them and connect them, and geometry nodes is basically the exact same, just with different nodes. For example, if I want to array this even more, I can search for array. No, not for array, for duplicate. Here, duplicate. Why isn't it? Or for example, why isn't it showing the? Yeah, I'm just using another node right now. Geometry, merge geometry, for example. Geometry. Why isn't creating nodes? I actually don't know why it is just not creating any nodes. So it can create your own modifier, just TLDR. Basically, I don't want to waste some time and fiddle around like this, but you can create your own modifier to create your certain special effect, you say so. And that's basically it. You have a lot of more handy shortcuts, but they aren't really that useful for Trackmania related things, since you want to keep your models quite simple, especially when you export them. But if you want to look more into Blender and especially texturing, you have to look out for these special shortcuts. They have a lot of and save a lot of time. And if you want to edit your own textures, you can use Substance Painter 3D. It is on Steam, but it costs around 100 euros, so it's quite expensive. But you can get a free student license for 1 year and then create your own textures with it. It is you can create procedural ones, so you can put it on a plane, for example, but I'd recommend Substance Designer for this, so you can create brand new ones and especially seamless ones where you don't have to look out for special themes. Yeah, florenzius is going to continue with light mapping and UVs and how you can reshape your object to be the most performance gain you can have. Yeah, that's from my side.
Alright, I guess it's my turn. Let me just start a stream. And I hope that is working. Yeah, seems like. Alright, welcome to my pod, I guess. And as previously announced, I will cover some more technical topics, I guess, starting with the light maps. And it's a quite important topic. And first of all, I apologize for the stream quality. You will see it. Text will be a little bit less readable in Blender, but that's because of some technical workarounds we had to do. And in case my voice is failing me tonight, I'm sorry I'm a bit sick, but I will try my best to stay understandable. Alright, so, yeah, as I said, light maps are quite important. And some people seem to put less effort into light maps, sadly, but let's clear that up and improve that for the future. So basically, if you want to achieve good looking results in game after calculating shadows, you will need a perfect light map UV layout. And it's quite simple in Trackmania. You just basically have two UV layers. The first one being the base material, which is for the visuals, for the textures and stuff, and the light map, which gives you the final touch, the shadows. And basically, the game engine uses the light map to bake a shadow map or ambient occlusion map onto the mesh. Some people might have heard about that before, but you also see it on the slide currently. And basically, Trackmania calculates light bounces when you finalize your track, and it gives the last, sort of spice to the map. It makes it look more realistic and appealing. And every map basically has a light map at the very end, and that's basically when you calculated your shadows. And the global maps light map, which can be seen at the very right, is a big composition of all single light maps, and it's a texture of 2048 pixels. So the more objects and blocks you will have, the less precision each single item will have. So that's why bigger maps have less precision and more shadow bugs. as Grymlock mentioned before. So yeah, the best we can do is create a proper light map. And what we can do is follow some simple rules. It's not really hard to create a light map. Basically, there are three things to consider. Stay within the UV bounds, as Grymlock said as well. So always stay in the little box, as seen in the left. Avoid any overlappings, because these parts usually end up being completely black in the game, or not look realistic, and avoid deformation. But before I talk too much, let's just get into it, and you will see my blender. For this case, I prepared a little model, which is basically the Trackmania logo, and I basically finished the base material layer. You cannot see it because it's just a concrete texture. What we want to do is create a proper light map. And currently it looks like this. That's on purpose. It's not a proper one. That's how you not do it. But first of all, in case someone struggles with the concept of unwrapping and the concept of UV maps, just imagine a paper cube in real life. And I think each and every one of us had a paper cube in their hands, and when you print it out, it has to be laid out, has to be unwrapped before you glue it. And let's just create a cube and look at it, and it looks like this. And this is basically the way a cube is unwrapped. And now imagine the light is shining onto this cube, and you want every side to have an own space for light to be projected. And that's basically what the light map is doing. So yeah, let's just create a light map for this logo. Basically, we have two proper ways, which have also been sort of shown before. We can do a light map or a UV map in general, completely custom or completely manually by using the unwrap function, or we use the Smart UV project. And in our case, actually, the Smart UV project seems to do a proper job. We can just try that. In the left, you will see my keystrokes, since the rest is not readable, it seems. So let's try that and unwrap it with the algorithm. And you can see it looks quite good, actually. However, in some cases, it might not be sufficient. So what I'm at least always doing for my objects, when they are not too simple, is making a completely manual or custom light map, and that means unwrapping. And unwrapping will only properly work when you define yourself at which edges the software should, disconnect faces. And basically, you can see that being done already here. This is like the red edges that I'm selecting right now. These are called seams. And let's just get rid of all seams for now. So if we try to unwrap this, we will get an error because 4 of 5 islands cannot be unwrapped, and you will see there's even some glitchy stuff going on in the light map because that's not the way it's supposed to work. So now this is actually quite simple for this model, but it works like for every model the same way. We will just see where it makes the most sense to cut up the model, and this not only applies to light maps but also to the base material and stuff, but especially with the light map it's quite important to know what makes the most sense and where the light will be broken, So this face will receive different light than this face, and when they are like one UV shell, then it will look pretty strange and not realistic. So what I'm doing is basically, at least for this model, selecting these edge loops that will basically be cut. So you can see my keystrokes, as I said. We will just select all the edges that make sense to be disconnected from the rest. So as I said, it's quite a simple workflow with this object. And I think we've got all of them. And then we hit Control E and mark seam. And basically, when we unwrap it now, Blender will know, alright, we have these red edges, and For example, this face will not be connected to this one. Actually, I forgot to mark this seam. Let me do that. I think I got almost all. Yeah, it was 2 I missed. Okay. So unwrap it, and something is broken. And I know what is broken. We got this little cylinder here. And of course, this one needs to be unwrapped as well. And usually for cylinders, just mark one edge, select one edge, and then mark it as seam. And we can try it, and we will have a proper light map. So basically, that's the way it works. And there's one thing that I discovered some months ago that is actually quite useful, and I think I'm not the only one that uses that. For light maps, always make sure to use your UV space that you have wisely, so the entire box. And currently we have a proper UV layout, there's no problem. But we could use it even more efficiently, because the more space you use that you have, the better your result will look. Even if it's a small difference, it can at least have some effect in game, especially when the map is very crowded. So we can actually, with a tool, measure the area that is currently selected, that is filled by UV shells, and that's about 58%, let's say 59%. And one thing that is really useful, especially for texture creation, of course that's not related to light mapping, but when you create your own model and you want to create a texture atlas and unwrap it, then it's also useful. It's called UV packing. And there's a plugin for that, which I purchased, I think, from Gumroad, but there's also a few free alternatives. This plugin basically has an underlying algorithm that checks how to rotate, how to scale, how to move all these shells to have a mostly dense area. And we can just try that out. I currently have an algorithm running that is checking by itself how to improve it the best, and I think we got it now. And you can see we got 81.1% of the area used now. So you can see there's a big difference between having a light map like this and having a light map like this. So this is just a side trick that I would really recommend you to use. Try to find a layout that makes the most sense, that is not buggy, that is not overlaying and overlapping, and then work on the density. You can also do it manually, of course, but that will be a huge pain, especially with bigger objects. Alright, so we can actually try it now in game by calculating shadows. I got the game running in already. So let's see. This RTM logo. Okay, that's from a previous test. Let me just update it. Here we go.
I think you have to switch scenes.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
That's what I was fearing, forgetting to switch scenes. Alright, but you didn't miss much. I just placed the object and calculated shadows, and you can see the nice logo is in place and looking pretty good actually. So we see the natural shadow bounces. Looks like in real life almost. We can see the bottom parts being almost black, and even some of the grass reflection is absorbed. So that's how a light map should look. And let's return to Blender now, because I want to show you how to not do it, and some may be curious how it would look if something is overlapping or broken. So let's just break all of the 3 rules. First of all, let's go out of bounds. I just scaled every UV shell up by its own origin, so it will look like this. We can deform this kind of stuff, and automatically we also have overlapping, which is all not how to do it. So I would say let's try that again. And in game, I will just update the item really quick, and you can see it looks quite broken. Something is wrong. And also after calculating shadows, you will see that it's not the way it's supposed to look. And yeah, in case you did something wrong, you will see it very quickly. So I would recommend, especially for really important or urgent items, check before using the item if your light map is correct or if there's anything wrong with it, because when you have a big map, it might really look bad at some point. All right. Another thing that is worth to know, the Blender plugin by Skyslide and Juice, I think, allows you to create files for your mesh modeler import. And this means that, well, basically the item.gbx file that is generated out of Blender cannot be edited in Mesh Modeler, but you can additionally generate .mesh.gbx files. And this means these files can be opened in-game and edited there. But once you do that and save it in-game, your light map will be entirely overridden by by a light map created by the game, and it will use an own algorithm, and you cannot have any control over that. And the mesh modeler light maps are known to be sometimes less precise, so I would always recommend to do all of that stuff completely in Blender. But basically, yeah, that's it. I think it's quite simple if you got the concept and if you avoid overlappings and stuff like that. So it's always something that takes some time, especially for bigger objects, and if you're really lazy or if the object is too complex or would take too much time to do the light map manually, you can always just fall back to the smart UV projection and maybe play around with the angle limit. It should be self-explaining, and yeah, that's basically it. All right. Yeah, let's get to the next point, which is LODs. And some of you might heard about this commonly used technique in game design, and it's also relevant to Trackmania. LOD stands for level of detail, and I don't know any game that doesn't use this. As you might expect, it's about optimization, and a level of detail model allows us to provide a lower poly version of the original object, which will be visible on a higher distance. And for imported items, you will see the lower poly version a few blocks away, but that really depends on your game settings. Sometimes it's closer, sometimes it's more far away, depending how high your shader settings are. If you render a screenshot or video, LODs are usually disabled and you only see the high poly meshes, but usually you wouldn't be able to play on the same quality as a render. So as you can see in the slide, basically, it's quite simple to understand as well. Like at the very left, of course, this image is not by me, but at the very left we see a really high poly statue or monument or whatever, and it has about 60,000 polygons. And there are like 3 additional versions, which are always going a level lower in the polygon count, and the very last version has 60 polygons. And now imagine you see this very last version about 1 kilometer away or something. Of course, that's really dependent on the game, but you see the object on a screen space of maybe 8 square pixels, you will not see a difference. So it's a really good way to optimize, because your GPU always has to render everything, and to avoid performance issues, LODs are really important. So Nadeo uses multiple versions of LODs, starting with LOD 0, which is the high poly or original model, and will always be visible when you're driving on this block or item, because you're just close enough to have the highest poly one. And then of course there's LOD 1, LOD 2, and so on. And their vehicles even have up to, I think, 5 LOD versions, and trust me, you don't want to see the lowest one. It looks like a cube almost, but as I said, you wouldn't notice that. You can see on the right, I had an Open Planet plugin to fake the LOD effect. So that means I could see the lower poly version even on closer distance. And you can see there was quite some optimization going on. So it's quite low poly, but you don't really see it. So within a Nadeo importer tool, we are given access to LOD1, which is basically the next lower poly version, and it's actually enough for items. We are not restricted to anything. The only rule that we have to follow for LODs is, and I will show that in a minute, that we have to keep the light map layout and stuff. So yeah, I don't want to read a novel here. Let's get into it again, and to demonstrate the effect of this technique, I will show you how it works basically, and I got a model for that. First of all, we just have a normal cube, and it has a random texture, of course. The cube looks like this. It's not the most optimized cube, but it's important for our testing purposes. You see it has 26 vertices. Actually, if you wonder how to view the vertices and stuff, it's quite simple. You can go to the menu right here at the top and enable the statistics. This is really important. At least it's good to know how many vertices, faces, or triangles you have. It's all numbers to measure how complex, how heavy your mesh is getting. And well, this cube is not just a random cube, it's basically the LOD 0. It's a high poly one. And I also made an LOD 1. It's not lower poly actually, it has also got 26 vertices, but it's just to show you in game that there's actually a difference. So to see an obvious difference from the distance, I just, extruded these edges, these points, and we should be able to see that in game. And let's see. So right now we got the normal cube. We can just move it up a little bit. We can spawn as well. And now let's go on distance. And you will see very slightly there's a little star now. So you see it takes effect. We can also zoom in and see a little difference. And if I'm not wrong, there's even the plugin for that, the Tweaker plugin. And, we can fake that pretty easily. All right, let's get back to Blender. Okay, so in case you don't really know how to do the LODs or how to define one object as LOD, basically it's just a suffix in the mesh name. At least it works like that with the Blender plugin. I'm not a user of the command line tool, so it might be different. There's also just a checkbox right here. Just check LOD1 and it will change the name of the mesh. Okay. So, yeah. How do we effectively use this technique for our items? So key to creating LODs is basically simplifying your high poly mesh in order to reduce the poly count. In this case, I of course didn't reduce anything. It was just to show you that there is indeed a difference. But yeah, we want to give our GPU an easier job of rendering. So of course we will have to reduce a lot. And to demonstrate my workflow, I will use the drone item I created for this year's Grand League, World Cup actually. So let me open that. It's this one. You might have seen it on the maps floating around. And this model has a very high poly count, as you can see. At the very top, it's like 3.2 thousand vertices, and this is quite heavy actually for such a small item. I mean, it's compared to the car, it's quite small. Yeah, so pretty high. And if you have many on them on the map, then you might have some FPS drops in worst case. So I think we can bring this model down to about 1000 vertices, maybe a little bit less, really depends. And to start working on your LOD, make sure that the initial model is completely finished and working. So we got our base material, we got our light map, and the light map looks like this actually. I think it's finished. It's packed. There's no overlapping and stuff. So it's a proper and working light map. texturing is done and materials are assigned as well. So as I said earlier, it's really important to make sure that your lower poly mesh will have the same light map. So never change any edges like this. Never remove the red edges and never screw with your UV layouts. For the base material it may work, but not for the light map, because your lower poly model will receive the same ambient occlusion texture that is being calculated for the higher poly one. And if the lower poly one has a difference in the UV layout, then it might look weird. But at the same time, it's on distance, so it may not be that visible. So the simplifying process basically is quite straightforward and boring, but everyone has to figure out their own preferred way. I would not recommend using modifiers for this one, like the decimate one. I mean, it's pretty aggressive and really reduces, but it will totally destroy your light map layout. So big no, don't do that. I will just show you how I would do it for this object. It can get a little bit boring. I guess it will be done in like 5 minutes. So if you're watching the video, you can just skip to the next 5 minutes or something. But actually, it may be interesting for you. So let's look at the drone. First of all, let's duplicate it. I almost forgot that. The original model will get the LOD 0, which is the high poly version, and the other one, the new one, will have the LOD 1. So let's hide the high poly one and get straight into the low poly one, which is still high poly obviously, but we will make it low poly. So where could we simplify that? And it's quite obvious that we can remove a lot of edge loops. For example, these. So I just did a few loop selects, as you can see, holding Alt and then the right mouse button. We can just select a bunch whole of loops if it's not triangulated. And then I'm using a function that is called dissolve selection. I don't actually know where the menu point for that is. You can type it up and it will work like this, but I mapped it on my left mouse button. Since I'm using the Blender 2.79 controls, my left mouse button is only used for positioning around the 3D cursor, so in edit mode it has no function. So I figured, why not use it for something useful? And I will just select a bunch of edge loops, left mouse button, and boom, it's completely simplified. This also works for vertices. Of course, I wouldn't do it here. And it also works for faces. But yeah, let's concentrate on the edge loops. So right here, we got a bunch of edge loops which make a smooth corner. It's not needed. You will not see that on different distance anyway. We can get rid of these outer loops as well. It shouldn't interfere with the light map. You can also just check if your light map is still okay. Oops. In my case, it looks still like the high poly one. So maybe check that sometimes in case you screwed something up. For the support thingies, we can just make it really low poly as well. That's something that won't be really visible on distance, I assume. Alright. The camera, of course, could be simplified as well. I'm not gonna do that right now because it's a bit more complex, but that's just something that takes a little time and practice. You could do stuff like this, of course. This is what I will do. But yeah. Then these arms could be simplified as well. And I think for the bottom we are good to go. Now there's one more element or a few more elements which add like many polys, and we are already like 1k polys down. The rotors are really high poly, and I don't even know why I did that, but let's just simplify them. And this is the part where it will take some time, so grab some popcorn or whatever and relax, sit back, and enjoy the show. I will keep like one loop. Oops, that was not intended. And at this part, I think it was a bit tricky to keep the light map layout in place. If you have like floating vertices like these, which are not really looking intended, then select them, hit double G, and you can slide them across the edge. This is something that helps a lot in 3D modeling, and in our case, it helps us simplify. So after doing that, make sure to remove doubled polygons. So we just removed 4 vertices, and I think it looks pretty good, even when it's simplified. So I'm just gonna do that for the other ones as well. I think there could be even ways to do this more efficiently or faster, but it's quite straightforward, so, and always dependent on your use case. And to left to go. And the last one. So I think after we finish with this part, I will try this in game. We can see with the plugin pretty well if the effect is there. But currently we already got a huge improvement in the polygon counts. I'm pretty sure you cannot read the number because it's quite small, but we almost halved it, so that's quite good. I think that Deo is even more aggressive with that. At least I talked to some people. Alright, we are at 1.3 thousand vertices, and this is like really, I think, below half of what we had. I guess let's try it. So we can compare it again. LOD 1 and LOD 0, and you can see bottom high poly 1 and top is the low poly 1. And actually from a distance you don't even see the difference. So it's quite good. I think that's the point of LODs. Let's convert it and try out the drone. Alright. Where is it? Ah, here we go. Alright, so we cannot see it on distance now because it's just too far away and the object is too small, but we can
I think I have
just...
to switch scenes again. Sorry.
Of course. Here we go. Trackmania. So let's see and enable it, and we can check for the low poly, and you see it got into effect. Of course, since I removed 2 edge loops here, this one and the bottom one, the light is of course entirely gone. Actually, where is my low? Ah, here we go. The light is gone, but that's just something you need to take care of, or you need to consider, not to destroy your base material UV map. But I think that's quite a good example of how to do it. Alright, yeah, one more thing I want to talk about is actually the file size. And for this one I'm gonna stream my entire screen. So currently the item weighs 232 kilobytes, and I think that's even compressed. It might be bigger. Yeah, it's uncompressed even 419 kilobytes. Now, let's try it without LODs, because as you might guess, LODs add a lot of space because it's more geometry data. We almost doubled the data, or like 1.5'd it right now. So let's see without. let's only try the high poly one, and we can just delete the LOD one. And we can check again for the size. And it's 158 kilobytes. So it's quite a big difference. And uncompressed, yeah, it's also less. So always keep in mind when you use LODs, when you use this technique, that you will have that you might have problems with your embed space, because when you're creating the next track of the day, you might have to watch the count of 4 megabytes or 6 megabytes when you have the unlimited plugin thing. So yeah, only use LODs when it makes sense. For bigger and more complex objects, I would recommend it, but I wouldn't do it for every object, because sometimes it really just adds unnecessary file space. Yeah, and yeah, just for fun, basically, one last thing about the LODs. Let's do a little stress test for the engine. And for this, I basically prepared a special model. You just see, well, this is LOD 1, this is LOD 0. We have some random shape, let's say it's a hill or something, and it has 164,000 vertices. And even my Blender struggles to do stuff immediately. And, you know, I just, yeah, subdivided it and just did some random displacement. And it's just to stress the game a little bit. And then we got LOD1, which is just 225 vertices. So it's like nothing compared to what we had before. And let's see if we get some FPS drops. I mean, should be, in case it works, because LODs need to make some sense in the end. So let's just spam this all across the map to let my GPU swell a little bit. And you can see the shadows even have problems following. Alright, and let's just spawn. And in the top left we see the frame rate, which is currently, yeah, barely hitting like 30 FPS. Sometimes a little bit more, depends on what you have in the view, but it's quite laggy. And obviously that's because it's really complex. So let's just go a little bit up and see everything from above. And my FPS go up to 50 to 60 FPS. So you would definitely see a big improvement. Of course, with your items or with the Nadeo blocks, it's not a matter of 30 FPS. It will most likely be 5 to 10 FPS, if not lower. But I think every improvement is should be appreciated. And here you can see really intensely that LODs do actually help performance. All right, so let's get to our last topic from my side, which is mesh smoothing. And this is actually a pretty straightforward or simple one. So basically, yeah, for Trackmania, it's the same principle as for normal 3D modeling. And to make it simple, objects can either be shaded smooth or flat. And it's useful to apply a smooth shading on your object if you don't want to show the flat surface when it's quite low poly. And you see it in the graphic. So in the left we have a random shape which is smooth, in the right we have it flat, so it's quite low poly actually, but smooth shading hides that fact. And at the very right we see a model from me, which I will show in a minute in Blender, which is a mix between smooth and flat. And yeah, let's just hop into Blender and look at the smoothing thing. So in case you create like a mesh, let's say a sphere or something, and it should be really big in scale. Alright, let's ramp that down to 32 and 16. You see
You want to
it's
switch your scene again?
Yeah, here we go. You see it's quite flat. You see it's low poly, and basically what smoothing is doing is hiding that. So yeah, it's not hard to understand. Now of course we could just rely on flat smoothing and create a sphere that's like 256 segments and 128 rings. And if my Blender would load, yeah, now it looks like it looks like the sphere before, but of course it's just a really high poly count. So it helps you hide low poly meshes. So yeah, basically what I want to teach, or what I want to show, is how you control smoothing, especially when you have objects that rely on smooth shading and flat shading at the same time. So don't ask me what this is. This is just a random mesh that I made, but you will see if we just rely on smooth shading, it might look like this, and we don't want that. And there are two options again to take control over that. So there's an option called auto smoothing. You can enable it in the plugin, or I think well, you can type it up as well. I don't really know where it is in the menu right now. And auto smoothing will basically smooth. Let me just change one thing. Will basically smooth your mesh when the angle of two faces is below like 81.4 degrees in our case. And basically, we have two faces which have a really, really, big angle in between. So if it's above this number, the 81% degrees, then it will be smooth. And if it's below, like these two, I think this is like a 90-degree corner, then it will be flat. So basically, auto smoothing helps you doing that automatically. But for some meshes, you might want to have some control yourself. And let's just
The auto smoothing option is below the UV map, so you can enable it in Blender as well.
below the UV
On
map.
the right side, below the UV map
Oh yeah,
settings.
right.
Right there. In normals, I think.
Yeah, there it is. All right. This I used this before the plugin, but half a year using the plugin and all the knowledge is gone already. So now you know where to enable it. Perfect. So we want to do it manually now, and this is where we will use a new, not a new, but another sort of mode for edge loops or for edges. Before, for light maps and unwrapping, we used the seams, and now we will use the sharps. So we have an entirely smooth mesh now, which we don't want, but we want to mark ourselves where the smoothing should be broken or stopped. So we will just select all of the relevant edges. Should be all. And then hit Ctrl E and mark sharp, and you will have the same effect. So this is pretty straightforward, as I said. If you, for some reason, would want like this edge to be a smoothing breaker as well, I would call it like that, you can do it as well. And you can see here it's actually breaking this moving group. One trick actually to properly see your smoothing and to see if a reflection would look correctly, you can go into the madcap mode, which I'm already in, and then select this material, this look, and this really shows you how reflections would look. So if this was like, yeah, not with custom smoothing or auto smoothing, then it would look like this, completely scuffed. So it really helps you see if it's the right smoothing or not. Yeah, pretty much for the end, I have two more like tricks for you. Since some meshes are supposed to be maybe more realistic, or it could be a stylistic thing as well. Some people use like beveling. Let's just clear the sharps again. So for example, you have some edges. I would just use all of the outer edges again. I think it should be all. And let's quickly return into the normal mode. You want to bevel them, so you want to have, this effect. By scrolling, you can define how precise it is, but for now, let's use like one cut in the middle. And this looks pretty good, but if we want to see how the smoothing looks, it's still a bit weird because we don't have enough mesh data to distribute the smoothing. Basically, I don't know the exact technical reason, but it's just like that. And one trick to improve that, to improve the visuals of that, is to use a technique called weighted normals. And there's a modifier for that, which is at the very left. And you can see by just applying the modifier, it's already a bit improved. So this is before and this is after. And this basically applies some custom, some generated normal smoothing data onto your mesh, and even Trackmania will accept that. You can play around with the parameters, so you can put the weight up to 100. It might look still, weird at some points, but that's just something you need to try out. And you can also change the weighting mode to corner angle, for example. I don't see a big improvement now. Or to face area and angle, it's a little bit different, but not better. Alright, so the face area is the best one in this case, and just apply it. Always apply your modifiers, as Grymlock said, and you're good to go. If you want to clear this stuff, I think, yeah, under geometry data, there's clear custom split normals data, and we just reset it. So you can always remove it again. And for a very last technique or trick, which is actually quite relevant for custom vegetation, there's something called normal edit or normal editing. And we just got a tree here. I created this object some time ago for Trackmania 1 Bay, where I basically created a lot of vegetation assets in style of Trackmania 2020. So basically, the way Nadeo did it, of course a bit more optimized than me, is having random faces or face groups like this one placed randomly into a sphere of density, and then you will have a look like this. And it looks quite authentic, or at least serves its purpose. But you will notice in-game that the trees in Trackmania, let me just clear this mess up, that the trees in Trackmania look quite realistic, so you don't really see the low poly stuff. Oh, it's quite low resolution. Let me just change that back. Alright, here we go. So you see it's quite smooth. You see the sunlight is hitting the tree crown at the top left, and it's quite smooth. This is not the case in our model, and this is by default actually. And I think Nadeo did it the same way. We can copy the normals of a smooth object onto a group of faces, for example. So to show you properly what I mean, let's just disconnect the branches.
Scene again, sorry.
Scene.
For me, it's, yeah.
Alright, you see it?
Yeah, it's fine now.
And branches is connected, we can just hide them, I guess. So, now we have this, weird looking shading that's not real realistic, but we can just create like a sphere. Please. Alright. Scale it up a little bit. Oh, it's quite big. Yeah, that's why. We can shade it smooth as well. And we can use that as a shell. So make sure that your tree crown is actually entirely inside. Nothing is sticking out. Let's just give this a special name like shell, for example. We can actually hide this mesh, and now we will give our tree crown, or the bunch of faces that we have right here, the normal edit modifier. And shell. Perfect. And now it looks like this. So it looks like magic, but it's just copying the smooth shading from the sphere that is around. There are also some things to tweak, like you can go like all the way to 0% or to 100%. I always use the mix like in between of 75%. It looks like this. So it's not entirely round because that's not realistic either, and you still see that it's quite smooth and looking pretty good. So you will just apply this modifier and yeah, perfect. You have a tree. As always, you can clear this data, but I wouldn't recommend that. So if you're making vegetation, if you're making entire trees and stuff, you can keep it low poly, just make sure to take a look at the smoothing, and even that will look pretty good in game. So that's pretty much, I think, all from my side. I really hope that it could help you, that I or that we could show you some new stuff that you can maybe adapt, and I will give back the word to the admins, I guess. So thanks for your attention, and yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Florenzius and Grymlock. So if there are no other questions, I don't see any right now. I think this is it for today. I hope it was somewhat digestible. If you have any other questions, feel free to place your questions in the workshop questions channel. I think our presenters will stay for a few minutes and try to answer anything that comes. For anything else, please make use of the 3D modeling channel in this Discord, and then don't hesitate to tag the respective roles. As said in the beginning, the whole workshop will be uploaded to the Trackmania Scenery Hub YouTube channel, so stay tuned for this. In there, we will also provide timestamps for different topics, so you can jump around in there and only use what you need. So yeah, if there's nothing else, I think we can conclude the workshop now. Yeah, we wish everyone a nice rest of the evening. Thanks to everybody, and yeah, until next time.
BMX wants Florenzius tree in game now.
So yeah, actually it's not in game, but I have it in Mania Planet. So let me just open it there, I guess. It should work the same way, I think, in Trackmania 2020.
Yeah, I think they use the same render engine, so it shouldn't be any different.
You just need to take care of your textures, like use the, what is it called? Custom mod trans, I think, is the texture for that. It has like,
Yeah, it's the only transparent texture currently that is like free for use. So
yeah.
if you have another tree or another leaf, you have to use a decaled texture, and that's they're quite buggy sometimes, so
Yep.
they can't really fit your tree. So that's why texture atlases are like really useful, especially for leaves.
So I made a bunch of trees. I can hopefully my game starts. Basically, the idea was to replace the old 2D, X trees that we have in like all games from 2005, and that's basically part of the new Bay title pack that's coming at some point. So I hope my game is visible. Okay, right, we got another questions from Choose. Is the margin between islands important, and why line between custom islands pretty often have weird shadow? So basically, the margin is quite important because there will be unprecise, spots in the ambient occlusion map. I wouldn't say there's like a rule to follow. I cannot say it should be 0.01 or 0.02. That's something you need to figure out yourself, I think. So that's, yeah, I think using a margin of 0.01. But if your object is really big and you have many faces, then it may be a really big margin. And if you have a smaller object with like 2 or 3 shells, then it might be too small. So yeah, we cannot say for sure. And about the weird shadows, well, that's something we cannot avoid, sadly. We can counter steal by creating a proper light map, of course, as I talked about. But the game at some point will always show some darker spots or some brighter spots where it's not supposed to be, because we are limited to 2048 pixels of light map space, and at some point that will be not sufficient. So let's quickly look into the trees. So here we go. You can see it's quite similar to Trackmania Next, or Trackmania 2020 as you want to call it. Light is coming from the top left and it's being distributed quite smoothly, but you still see the different shadows of the texture by itself. This cannot be avoided, and it's still something that makes it realistic. Maybe with shadows it looks a bit better, but yeah. So yeah, it's a bit more saturated. And basically this applies to all parts of vegetation. I just made a Blender asset library with a bunch of objects, bunch of plants and stuff, and it worked out pretty well, I would say. So I don't see why it wouldn't work this way in the new game. And yeah, I think that's the showcase.
All right. If we don't have any other questions, I think that'll close the evening. So thanks again, everyone, for showing up and for joining. You'll be notified once we upload all this to YouTube. And have a good rest of your evening.